Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the managing director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. As the title of this video suggests, we're going to be discussing administrative processing. What is administrative processing? Well, administrative processing is a term that is used by consular officers at a U.S. consulate or possibly an embassy abroad, specifically in the visa section. That's either the immigrant or non-immigrant visa section, although I don't think I've ever seen administrative processing come up in a non-immigrant visa context, but I guess it could. I used to see this quite a bit more frequently than I do currently, but administrative processing is kind of a blanket term that's used to describe basically just, for lack of a better term, administrative matters that need to be undertaken with respect to a given visa case. And it's not necessarily nefarious, or nefarious is the wrong word. It's not necessarily a bad thing to get an administrative processing notification. Currently, in some cases, it's possible to check online the status of a visa application. And in certain situations, you'll see administrative processing will come up as opposed to pending or issued, etc. So what does it mean? Well, it can mean a number of things. I used to call, and this was 7 or 8 years ago, when it was still possible to go ahead and in person deal with the U.S. Embassy on a rather regular basis, we would see cases get issued with just administrative processing. And that could mean anything from, oh, it's being investigated by the fraud prevention unit, or they just, there was something complicated about the case. And I often think that it was possible that perhaps the Department of State legal opinion was being sought. There were various more complicated things associated with administrative processing, for example, FPU or legal opinion. Meanwhile, there are also more sort of innocuous things that could be administrative processing. For example, in the current era where there's sort of this digital interface where you can see the current status of a given visa application, administrative processing might come up just for a couple of days, and it's just sort of the standard blanket phrase used when a 221G follow-up is basically being reviewed. A 221G is basically a refusal to issue a visa pending further documentation. If that further documentation is remitted, then the officer needs to go ahead and review that further documentation before making a decision whether or not to issue the case or issue the underlying visa. In those circumstances where that case is under review under 221G, I've seen the administrative processing term used to sort of just blanket and explain what's going on in that given situation. So the thing to take away from this video is it's going to vary depending on the circumstances of a given case, exactly what administrative processing means. This term doesn't come up nearly as often as I once saw it. Probably in a given year, I would see this come up on a monthly basis, probably a couple, two, 3 times a month. I'd see them just sort of issue administrative processing. And I used to joke, and maybe it's not a warranted joke, but there was a time I called it the black hole of the visa application process, because it would go into administrative processing and I'd follow up for clients and they just keep saying, well, it's in administrative processing. We'll get back to you. And there really wasn't any more explanation given than that. These days, it doesn't really seem to come up that way. When we see administrative processing, I've seen, with any frequency that I have seen it over the past 2 or 3 years, it's almost always been in the context of a 221G, and that term simply meant that the case was under review after having documentation resubmitted to the embassy pursuant to a 221G request for further evidence.